Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to episode 20 of Evil Angels, Demons, and the Occult, The Dark World. We're now going to do the first of three questions on the subject of Halloween. Question number 35 is, what is the history of Halloween? The history of the holiday we call Halloween is both long and complex. We'll attempt to simplify it by hitting some of the key points as we seek to understand how this particular holiday developed. First of all, we want to look at Halloween in ancient Britain. Halloween in medieval times was known as All Hallows Eve. It was celebrated on October 31st, the eve of All Saints' Day. The way in which the name developed is both interesting as well as disturbing. We can explain it in this manner. In ancient Britain and Ireland, the year was divided into two parts. Summer was celebrated from May through October, while winter was November through April. The Celtic festival of Samhain, which is Gaelic for summer's end, observed the end of summer. It was the eve of the new year, which was celebrated on November the 1st. This was the time that the herds returned from pasture and preparations were made for the long, hard coming winter. Now, this night was an occasion to set huge bonfires on hilltops. These bonfires would burn all winter long. This would ensure the survival of the people during the long winter months. Now, there were other reasons as to why these fires were lit. For one thing, sacrifices to the gods were made on those fires. The spiritual forces were acknowledged on that night, as well as placated by the sacrifices. Prayers were sometimes offered for the dead. This, they believed, would guarantee their protection from these spirits. Now, in addition, it was believed that the light of the fires would frighten away evil spirits, which might have been roaming that night. So, indeed, it was believed that on this particular night, the spirit world came into contact with the natural world in a unique way. Thus, the souls of the dead could actually wander the earth on that one particular night. It was also thought that these dead souls would visit the homes of their relatives on Samhain. So consequently, the people offered sacrifices to appease these spirits of the dead. It seems at the beginning, these particular spirits were viewed as rather harmless. All right, but now we're going to see how Halloween took on a sinister meaning. The festival eventually acquired a more sinister meaning. Ghosts, witches, black cats, fairies, demons, and hobgoblins were thought to be roaming around during the night. These evil spirits were thought to control nature, and therefore they must be placated. It was also thought to be a favorable time of the year for divination, and so that was practiced about marriage, luck, health, and death. It was the only day when the help of the devil was invoked. So in other words, it was really the night of darkness where they would practice divination to find answers to certain questions about marriage, health, luck, etc. So this was basically the devil's night. All right, now we'll look at Halloween and the church. Samhain, along with the other native holidays, was still celebrated among the pagans when the church became dominant in Europe. This caused the church to make decisions as to how to respond to these pagan holy days. In AD 601, Pope Gregory, in an effort to wipe out the pagan holidays, issued an edict to missionaries about how to deal with native beliefs and customs. He ordered the missionaries to, quote, use the customs rather than obliterate them. For example, if a group worshiped a tree, the missionaries were told to consecrate it to Jesus Christ rather than cut it down and destroy it. Therefore, they allowed its worship to continue, but now in a Christian context rather than a pagan one. Now, as for pagan temples, the missionaries were to remove the idols, sprinkle the place with holy water, and then replace the idols with icons of the church. Accordingly, the pagan temple was turned into a building which honored Jesus Christ. In some, the church was to incorporate the pagan traditions rather than outright objecting them. So, in addition, it allowed the Christian faith to be spread and readily accepted in this previous areas where paganism ruled. Now, this was at a cost, though. While the pagan celebrations were diminished, the problem was they weren't entirely eradicated. The followers of the old religion continued to practice their beliefs. However, because of the stranglehold that the church held on these people, the practice was now done in secret. Therefore, those who practiced the black arts were branded as witches. Now, we come to All Saints' Day, substituted for Samhain. Eventually, the church holy days were purposely set to coincide with the holidays of the various pagan peoples. It was assumed that this would obliterate the meaning of the pagan holiday. So what did they do? Well, it led to the substitution of All Saints' Day for Samhain. In fact, the day in which the dead saints were honored was purposely moved from its original date of May 13th to November 1st. This was done in the year 834. This was done in an effort to thwart the continued celebration of Samhain. Now, instead of giving devotion to Satan, it was the martyrs who were honored. In fact, the day in which the dead saints were honored was purposely moved from its original date of May 13th to November 1st, as we said in 834, and this is supposedly going to thwart the celebration of Samhain. So they're honoring now the martyrs instead of giving devotion to Satan. So here's the thought. Well, the people now would see this day as honoring the saints who had died rather than worrying about evil spirits of the dead roaming around to annoy them. So this resulted in a diminishing of the traditions associated with the night, October 31st. Here's the problem. However, the beliefs were not eradicated. The powerful deities of the Celts were now reduced in their size and status. They became fairies or leprechauns. In other words, they were still deities, but now they're reduced to small little deities. Yet the old beliefs never died. In fact, the idea of the wandering dead became more powerful than the feast that honored the dead saints. So with the competition here, the Feast of the Dead Saints was more powerful among the people than the Feast of the Church, honoring the dead saints. So the wandering dead won the day, as it were. So, in fact, the idea of the traveling dead resonated with the people more than the thought of honoring dead saints of the Roman Catholic Church. So herein lies the problem. All right, we're now going to move to All Souls Day. This led the Roman Catholic Church, all these problems, in the year 988 to establish November 2nd as All Souls Day. This was in time when the living prayed for the souls of the departed, both believers and unbelievers. Again, the idea was to substitute a holy day for the continual practice on the eve of Samhain. Yet these practices by the Roman Catholic Church did not quell the desire for the people to celebrate the eve of Samhain on October 31st. Now comes the Protestant Reformation. Interestingly, the Protestant Reformation, in its attempt to bring Christians back to biblical beliefs, rejected the idea of praying for the dead. Indeed, the scriptures make it clear that the fate of the dead is determined in this life alone. Once this life is over, prayers for the dead are useless. So All Souls Day was removed from the church calendar at that time, and it was not restored till 1928 by the Roman Catholic Church. All right, so here's the question. Where does the name Halloween come from? Where do we get it? Well, we're now going to look at the origin of the name Halloween. All Saints' Day was also known as All Hallows' Day. Hallow means to set apart or to be holy. The idea that the night before All Hallows' Day was one of these nights of intense supernatural activity. People continue to celebrate this night as a time in which the dead wandered around. In other words, they didn't give up their celebrations of Samhain. However, because of the Christian influence, these dead were now considered to be evil rather than good. Here's where the evil comes in. The citizens continue to give food and drink to placate these evil spirits. At this time, the masked impersonators began making the rounds asking for food and drink. Eventually, All Saints' Evening became All Hallows' Evening. This was shortened to All Hallow Eve or Hallow Evening. Finally, it became Halloween. Sadly, a day that was supposed to honor the Christian dead, the Christian saints who had died, has been changed now to a night in which the world honors the realm of the dead with all its evil intentions. And this is the sad thing. From All Hallows Eve to Halloween, and it was a day that Christian saints were supposed to be honored. And yet what happened? It was a day where the realm of the dead and all the evil intentions were celebrated. All right, so we learn a very valuable lesson from this. It's about compromise. Instead of trying to incorporate pagan days into the Christian calendar, we should label them for what they are: superstitious pagan days. Halloween, as we know it, would have never been a major holiday glorifying the dark realm of the dead had it not been for the Roman Catholic Church purposely moving All Saints' Day to the same day the pagan festival of Samhain was celebrated. All right, so a quick summary of the history of Halloween. The history of the holiday Halloween can be summed up as follows. The ancient Celts of England celebrated the end of summer with a festival called Samhain. At that time, these celebrations took on a sinister meaning. Eventually, the church incorporated it as a day to honor the Christian saints. They thought that this move would end the paganism connected with it. However, instead of ending the pagan rituals connected with this night, it took on an entire new meaning. Consequently, the misplaced idea of incorporating the date of a pagan holiday with Christianity has only given the rise to the prominence of Halloween. Very, very sad history, isn't it? All right, now we're going to move to question 36, and we're going to find out about some of these popular traditions about Halloween, where they come from, particularly here in America. All of us are aware that there are a number of traditions associated with Halloween. It's often asked, where did these traditions originate from? Now, this is important to understand. There is no consensus of opinion on the subject. However, the following observations we're going to make seem to be based in fact. This is the best we can do because there's a lot of varying theories about the origin of where these all came from. Some of them we're more confident with others, but let's look at them. Harvest festivals. All right. It seems that Halloween had its origin in the harvest festival that would take place late in the year. The crops were harvested and then portions were brought out as an offering to the gods. This occasion was used to give thanks to the supernatural powers that ensured continual growth of the crops. The main harvest festival of the Celts was the Feast of Samhain, held on November 1st. Many of the customs associated with the harvest festival are still being celebrated in one form or another on Halloween. Bonfires. This was an important part of the Celtic celebration on October 31st. The Celts would light these fires, which would be kept burning all winter. We mentioned that. On this night, they would burn trash, dead vegetation, as well as animals sacrificed to the gods. Not only did they sacrifice animals on occasion, they would also sacrifice humans to appease the gods. So human sacrifice became part of this night, unfortunately. The goal was to ensure that the sun would return after winter. In other words, unless they believe unless they kept sacrificing to these gods, the sun may not return and be constantly winter, as it were. So the goal was to ensure that the sun would return after the winter, and the fire would also supposedly frighten away these evil spirits. Now, there was an old custom, too, where nuts were thrown into the bonfire and they would explode. The purpose was to drive away evil spirits. Later, when fireworks were introduced to the West, they were substituted for the nuts. This explains the origin of fires on Halloween night. Well, how about food? Food was also offered at these bonfire events. The cattle which couldn't make it through the winter were slaughtered. The people would feast on some of the meat and salt the rest for later. However, they would also leave portions of the food for their deceased relatives who might visit on that particular night, October 31st. Now, black cats. Black cats and Halloween seem to go together. However, black cats were not originally associated with Halloween. This development occurred later on. Tradition says that witches had the ability to change into black cats. After dark, all cats looked black, so the witch's cat was thought to be black. Now, interestingly, depending upon the country where one lives, black cats can be seen as either good or evil. In Asia and the UK, the United Kingdom, black cats are usually seen as symbols of good luck. However, here in North America, it is believed that bad luck will befall you if a black cat crosses your path. Yet if a white cat crosses your path, it is assumed that your luck will be good. As we mentioned, though, it's just the opposite belief in the UK. Well, how about witches? Witches are seemingly the first thing one thinks about when the subject of Halloween arises. Traditionally, the witch has been the scary old hag who casts these spells. In ancient times, witches were actually burned in the Halloween bonfires. Again, one of the terrible, terrible truths of the history of Halloween. Now, this stopped around 1600. Instead, an effigy of the witch was substituted for the person. In other words, they burned an effigy rather than the actual person who they thought was a witch. Yet, the witches continued to be a central part of the Halloween celebration. However, today, the witch is seen as an imaginary figure, like the vampire, which represents the scary supernatural realm. Unfortunately, a fascination about witches can develop. Now, what's interesting, in modern times, the witch is not seen as the traditional old hag. Instead, she is a young, beautiful girl who is anything but scary. Furthermore, she is said to have power over others. This, of course, makes the idea of becoming a witch as something that's attractive. Indeed, a number of television shows have used this concept of beautiful young girls as witches. All right, now, wearing costumes, disguises, and going door to door trick or treat. Where'd all that come from? Going from door to door is traced back to the idea of the souls of the dead, along with witches, fairies, and demons who wander out on this particular night. Food and drink were left out to placate them. As centuries passed, people began to dress up as these creatures. So the origin of wearing Halloween costumes is uncertain. It's also known as guising, Guizing, derived from the word disguise. Some believe that the Celts wore masks and blackened their faces so they would not be noticed by evil spirits. They just wanted to blend in with the spirits. Consequently, they would go around without being spotted. Others denied that the Celts wore masks to blend in. Instead, it was believed they wore masks to frighten away the evil spirits. In other words, the masks were used to scare these spirits of the dead. Another theory has masks originating when people dressed in costumes and went house to house performing or for food. In other words, to make these performances, ask for food. And this was called mumming, M-U-M-M-I-N-G. All right, now we come to Mischief Night. In parts of Ireland and Great Britain, October 31st was known as Mischief Night. The townspeople would go around town playing pranks on one another. On this particular night, there was no fear of being punished for their antics. However, in the 19th century, these customs made their way to the United States through Irish and Scottish immigrants. Mischief Night later turned into our modern tradition of trick-or-treat. And now we look at the jack-o'-lantern. This is an interesting story. Now, it's come down in various forms, but one of the popular views is that a sinful man named Jack trapped Satan in a tree. He refused to let him go until the devil promised to spare Jack from hell. However, since Jack was a sinner, he was unable to enter heaven. So, unable to enter heaven or hell, Jack was given an ember from hell to place on a turnip or a carrot to find his way around Earth's dark places. Later, pumpkins were used instead of turnips. So eventually, people would use the jack-o'-lantern on Halloween to frighten away evil spirits. It would be carried around the boundaries of the villages to keep the people safe from the devilish forces. So the modern carved pumpkin, with its light inside, goes back to the story of Jack and his lantern. According to the legend, Jack continues his journey to find his way around the earth in his deceased state. All right, now bats and owls. Because bats and owls are only seen at night, they became associated with the celebration of Halloween. In addition, the creepy look of bats made it a natural candidate for the scary nature of Halloween. It is also believed that these, as well as other nocturnal animals, could communicate with the spirits of the dead, which made everything obviously more spookier. Now, bobbing for apples. This is fascinating. The tradition of bobbing for apples came as a result of the Romans incorporating some of the traditions of Halloween. They had similar festivals at this time of year. The festival of Feralia honored the dead, while the festival of Pomonia honored the goddess of fruit. In addition, she was also seen as the fertility goddess. Nuts as well as apples were used in various games at the time. These festivals were combined with Samhain at some unknown time in the past during their harvest celebrations, when they celebrated the harvest. The first person to bite the apple would be the next person to marry. Since many people died in childhood in those days, it was important to carry on the family name. Therefore, bobbing for apples was not merely a game to them. It was indeed serious business. Of course, today the same meaning isn't attached to this practice any longer. People bob for apples as part of the Halloween tradition. And finally, orange and black colors. The colors of orange and black are uniquely associated with Halloween. It is believed that orange is used because it is the color of the changing leaves at that time of the year. In addition, pumpkins, one of the staples of Halloween, are orange in color. Black obviously represents the night. As we know, Halloween is celebrated after the sun goes down in the dark of night on October 31st. Hence, the color black is associated with it. So the combination of orange and black gives a sinister look to this particular holiday. In fact, it is one that we only use for this one day of the year, this combination, only for Halloween. It seems to be a trademark of Halloween and it alone. All right, this briefly sums up some of the popular traditions surrounding Halloween. And so we summarize it real briefly by saying this. There are a number of traditions surrounding Halloween that everyone is familiar with. And however, we are not familiar with the origin of these traditions. As we just said, we're familiar with the traditions, but we gave you the best shot we could on the origins. While there is some disagreement as to the exact origin of many of these practices, there are some where we can be certain of its origin. What we do know for certain is that Halloween has become big business. All right, we're going to have one more question on Halloween when we do our next episode, episode 21, and that is, what should Christians do at Halloween? So you want to pay attention to our next episode. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. Until the next time, may the Lord richly, richly bless you.